Hello, everyone. Welcome to yours and my favorite part of the week. That's right, it's your online social psychology course, and I'm here to walk you through the hottest topics in nature, origins, and functions of the self. All right, with that said, let's jump into it. How the self and the social world relate to each other? Let's start off by operationally defining self concept. This is a person's knowledge about himself or herself, including one's own traits, social identities, and experiences. William James in 1890 coined the term the quote me. This is now referred to as self-concept. In one sense, the self is all the knowledge you have about your characteristics and experiences. James noted, interestingly, that these two aspects of the self make it a unique topic to the study. That is, the self is a thing that thinks and a thing that is thought about. Freud characterized this as the ego, which is Latin for I, became the most common term for the aspect of self that controls one's actions. So not much to add here, but kind of self-concept, just kind of being the knowledge of yourself, who you are, your own traits, your identities, and your life experiences. What are some social influences on the self? People's self-concept emerges as they are socialized into their cultural worldviews. These serve as building blocks of the self, and they're specific to one's person's place and time in history. Culture and socialization, and I should say historical period as well, shape identities, which can include, for example, women or an American, your roles, such as a student or a friend of Jack, your traits, funny and honesty, for example, and your interests, such as soccer. So stopping there momentarily, history matters. This is what I stress in my developmental psychology courses, which is equally applicable here. Kind of the idea here is you can think of yourself existing in feudalism, for example. Say you're a serf. Well, that's going to influence your view of yourself because of that greater kind of political economy that you exist in. Or you can even think of a country. Many countries were not formed, or nation states, if you want to be a nerd about it, were not formed until 1950s, 1960s. So you could not be a quote unquote whatever a member of that country because it literally didn't exist if you were born 300 years ago as opposed to whatever today. Or your role, maybe throughout history, different races, genders, sexes banned from certain institutions, so you literally couldn't be a student at some point of time. But this also matters because, as stated, cultures change through time. How you organize society changes through times. Norms change through times, and those kind of time-based environmental factors are going to influence how you're socialized, and again, those kind of building blocks of yourself. Moving on to social identity theory, people define and value themselves largely in terms of social groups with which they identify, this theory argues. People come to know what characteristics they have by thinking of themselves in terms of family, race, nationality, and other group memberships. Two people raised in the same geographical region may define themselves in very different ways, depending on their group identification. So here we have social identity, so you can almost think of it as a group identity theory. So you value yourself in terms of the groups in which you identify, and you associate those groups to have certain roles, traits, interests, identities, which you are socialized to and you internalize. Now, granted, different members of the group can define these kind of roles and traits differently, and there are clashes within groups that challenge this. But largely stated, you think of yourself in terms of a group, some kind of identity, some kind of class or nationality, whatever it is. It helps shape who you are, or I should say by recognizing what kind of groups you are part of, which also can change through time. In a 1999 study, college students were told, based on their judgments of abstract paintings, that they tend to have a, quote, figure orientation or a, quote, ground orientation. When in reality, the researchers randomly assigned students to one of these two groups. Students who were told that they were high in a fictional trait, that is, surgency, they have never heard of, and despite never hearing that trait because it didn't exist, they consider themselves to be high in that trait. This is an example of how people define themselves in terms of their social group. So in this case here, researchers tell these participants, these college students, oh, it looks like based on the way you talk, the way you analyze this art, you are high in this trait, surgency. So when participants are told, hey, you are in a group that is high in surgency, the participants who were told that believed that they were higher in surgency, and not only that, but they rated how important certainty is to be higher than groups who were told that they were lower in certainty. So kind of just an example of how even in this like completely made up scenario of a fictional trait that really has no social meaning, you can manipulate what groups people believe they're a part of, and consequently how they think about themselves in terms of the attributes associated with that group, aka certainty, and how important it is to be high in that attribute, again, certainty. Interdependent and independent self. Cultures differ in whether they promote an understanding of the self as independent or interdependent. In relatively individualistic cultures, like North America, Australia, and Europe, people are more socialized to view themselves as, quote, unique individuals, relatively independent from others. Some common quotes include, I am artistic. While people socialize in collectivist cultures, like China, Japan, India, and Mexico, tend to view themselves as interdependent, defined primarily in relation to other people. Some common examples include, I am a daughter, or I am a Buddhist. We've talked about this in previous chapters, so we're not going to go into depth, but I will make my general caveats, as always, that these are kind of a broad generalizations that are kind of dichotomized by these two selves, and there is variation across quote-unquote collectivist cultures and individualistic cultures. And not only that, but for example, in North America, the number of people who identify with two or more racial groups has increased by more than 25% in the past 15 years. Thus, people having different combinations of these biracial people, theoretically having interdependent and independent views of the self, which maybe they can switch back and forth between, depending on who they are communicating with or what setting they're in. But really kind of just kind of demonstrating that this is socially based, and these kind of hybrids can exist, and it's not just a dichotomy, maybe some kind of spectrum, and even what is interdependent and independent can vary across cultures. But these are kind of our broad examples here of individualist cultures, much more viewing themselves as quote-unquote hashtag unique for me personally as a unique individual, and independent versus interdependent, kind of viewing yourself in relation to others because of the influence of your in-group, kind of helping shape who you are as a person. The influence of gender on the self-concept. Men and women are much more similar to one another than they are different. For example, women and men speak approximately the same amount of words per day, according to a 2017 study. Differences tend to be exaggerated and imagined. There are small effect sizes, which typically are not universal. They vary across cultures and time. Differences are assumed to be biological, but are often culturally based. Gendered behavior can be learned by being told what is appropriate. When preschoolers are told that some unfamiliar toys are for girls and some are for boys, they tend to like the toys described as appropriate for their sex and dislike the other toys. So in general, broadly speaking, this does not just include behaviorally, but also kind of neurologically and genetically, men and women are very, very, very similar. And the differences that do exist tend to be small effect size and kind of often reflect kind of historical shifts in the idea of gender roles and where, or I should say, whether women historically allowed to, be in a university setting, or kind of the assumptions of their ability in math and stuff like that. So, for example, you see the rates of women participating in like spelling bee, but for math, whatever that nerd shit is. The rates of women's participation increasing through time. You also see this kind of with chess and all those other things. You're kind of just reflecting different shifts in socializations and of gender roles through time. In this study, kind of just also demonstrating from 1995 that an ambiguous toy with no meaning to a child or a preschooler at that time. If you tell a preschool boy that is for boys, then the boys are more likely to play with it. If you tell that the preschool children, girls, that toy is for girls, they're more likely to play with it. And there's a whole host of, if you're kind of interested in this, you can contact me about the neuroscience of gender differences and kind of like a massive kind of critique of this from well-known scholars in the field. Social role theory. This theory argues that gender differences in behavior, personality, and self-definitions are related to long history of role distribution between the sexes and error-prone assumptions that these roles are essential to men and women's nature. Now, we kind of briefly talked about shifting gender roles through time, different accessibilities to different genders through time. So kind of focusing on the second bullet point here for a second, error-prone assumptions. Well, we've talked about this before with kind of this idea of evolutionary theory and when interpreting behavior contemporarily. Again, let's say that, that there are not potentially evolutionary reasons why humans behave in certain ways, but it is a risky kind of theoretical frame to use to interpret behavior, because what ends up happening often is that people look at the world around them and then assume, based on the current state of social relations, the way the economy is structured, the way the political structures, the cultural norms, cultural values, whatever, people will look at that and say, oh, well, this exists right now, therefore this must reflect some kind of ironclad law of nature, rather than it kind of reflecting different historical circumstances, which change through time. Inferences: women do more socially oriented and caregiving behaviors because that is what they're intrinsically good at. Men assume positions of leadership and power because this is what they are intrinsically good at. So again, kind of looking at the different roles, just looking, people kind of act as amateur psychologists and trying to figure out causal attributions we talked about in previous chapters. But you look at the world around you, you say, women are more likely to be a nurse or something like that. Women more likely to be a preschool teacher. Therefore, that is kind of intrinsic to the properties of what being a woman is. Or you can imagine existing in like 1919, prior to women having the right to vote in the United States, and just looking around and say, oh, look at that. Oh, there's only men here in leadership positions on our local city council or whatever, the Senate. There's not a lot of women voters there. I guess they intrinsically don't vote. Also, it could also reflect kind of the laws of that time. Again, demonstrating kind of the risk, the error-prone nature of kind of inferring kind of natural, universal kind of differences based on pure observation of the world around you. Which is why, among other things, we use the scientific method, ladies and gentlemen. The influence of context on self-concept. Some aspects of self-concept are relatively stable, like the attributes we view as most important for defining our sense of self, whereas other attributes may be descriptive, but not so self-defining. Self-schema. This is operationally defined as an integrated set of memories, beliefs, and generalizations about an attribute that is part of one's self-concept. Schema for compassion, for example, may include memories of specific events, such as last week I helped a duck get out of the road, or more general beliefs about how one typically behaves in various situations. For example, I always give change to homeless people. So there are stable and malleable aspects of self-concept, as stated. Stable, which are central aspects of the self-concept, and malleable aspects made accessible in specific social situations, motives, and cues. So we'll jump to more specific examples momentarily, but kind of for self-schema, kind of a critical aspect of this is that people in general are able to process information related to their self-schema very quickly. They're more likely to remember information consistent with their self-schema, so whatever, doing something compassionate, for example, and are more likely to forget or reluctant to believe information that is inconsistent with their self-schema. So say you have a self-schema of compassion and you, trip someone and you're like, that actually doesn't really count and la, 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 la. And so in order to kind of preserve your whatever compassionate self-schema, especially when it's a part of yourself, which is very defining and very important. So shifting social context can call up different aspects of the self-concept, changing how we think and act, which brings us to the working self-concept, the example of the kind of the malleable nature of your self-concept. The working self-concept is operationally defined as the portion of one's self-schema that is currently activated and strongly influences thoughts, feelings, and actions. So you can almost think of this like working memory, but for self-concept. So for example, at a party, you might be conscious of your identity as Susan's friends, since you came to the party with her, that you are shy when you're feeling awkward talking to people, and that you enjoy photography when admiring several photographs hanging in the house. But if you're in class, for example, the situational cues such as books and computers, as well as the motivation to succeed, will likely bring aspects of your, quote, student self, such as being intelligent, being industrialist, hardworking, stuff related to being a student, theoretically. So if you're playing basketball alone, for example, you're not thinking, oh, I'm Susan's friend right now. That kind of working self-concept is really not activated. Or you're not thinking of your student self when you're playing the new college football game, for example. Unless, I don't know, maybe take notes or something like that. Point being that the situation, the social context can shape your working self-concept. That is your schema that is activated within that particular context, which will in return influence how you think, feel, and act within that setting. Next, we have social status. Since that one is unique in some specific manner in relation to other people in the current environment, people can define themselves in terms of attributes that distinguish themselves from other people in their current environment. So imagine you're a non-traditional student. Maybe you're like, I don't know, 60 years old or something like that. You walk into a classroom, you see everyone's 20 years old, and you're like, oh, I'm much older than everybody here. Now, all of a sudden, kind of your age, that kind of working self-concept as an older adult is now more active. And your age in that moment becomes kind of a central aspect of yourself due to kind of the differences and the quote-unquote uniqueness of you within your current environment. And you can see this, and there's evidence of this for race, gender, age, etc. Maybe political like ideology or something, depending on where you are, culture, again, etc. So how do we come to know the self? People learn about themselves over the course of their everyday social interactions in a variety of ways. 3 we're going to cover, that is appraisals they get from others, self-comparisons, and self-perceptions. Beginning with reflected appraisals, Cooley and Mead developed the idea that people learn about and judge themselves on the basis of how other people perceive them. People use their understanding of how others view them as the primary basis for knowing and evaluating themselves. So how you interact with me, how you define me as a person is going to impact how I, in return, act and how I define myself. Because I'm using you, the hypothetical you, to learn about myself and judge myself. So people use other appraisals to know their own attributes, to evaluate themselves, and to judge their actions as good or bad. For example, a person might feel bad about a pile of laundry on the floor because she imagines their mom's voice saying, quote, "You are such a slob." People internalize others' appraisals. They evaluate themselves as if other people were in their heads observing them acting. This is more likely to develop and change in response to appraisals of people who are close or admired than in response to an appraisal of strangers. So through time, we do not need the kind of constant interaction of appraisal of other people. Rather, we internalize the judgments, the ways of acting or how we're supposed to act from other people. So in this example here, you have a parent who's just like, clean your room. And you look at your, growing up, and then you look at your room as an adult, and you're like, oh, my mom would say, clean up your room. You're being such a slob. So therefore, now I'm judging my behavior as bad. I'm evaluating myself as being dirty, and maybe I'll change my behavior. Now, all the other people's appraisals, the extent to which they change our behaviors and we internalize them will depend on or will be influenced by how close and admired that stranger or person is. So if somebody that we really, really care about, we're more likely to kind of internalize their evaluation and standards of us versus some just kind of like rando on the street, and we're just like, I'm not going to show what you think. Who cares? Broadly stated. But we also kind of internalize and use kind of like greater society norms to evaluate and judge ourselves as well. So failing to live up to being just a proud American or whatever, or a proud Floridian or something along those lines. If you actually value being a proud Floridian, of course. So let's make this a little more concrete with a few concepts related to appraisals. The first, symbolic interaction. Cooley and Herbert argue people use their understanding of how significant people in their lives view them as the primary basis for knowing and evaluating themselves, which ties directly to this looking glass self. This is as significant people in our lives reflect back to us who we are by how they behave towards us. So here, what we're doing is we're looking at other people to define us. We're not like just purely introspection or whatever. No, we look to other people, how they treat us, and then and how they view us and appraise us, and then we take that and we internalize that into our self-concept. So this is why it's like a looking glass here. You're looking at a mirror, you're looking at a person, you see how they behave and treat us, and now we're going to mirror that in ourselves because we're incorporating it into our self-concept. That's kind of the idea here. And appraisal is broadly stated, what other people think about us. So first you observe how others view you, what are called others' appraisal of you, and then again you incorporate those appraisals into yourself. So kind of counter to what a lot of, especially kind of like more individuals and cultures, argue. Looking to other people, which you then again internalize, incorporate into your self concept. So kind of one of the big studies related to Mead and Cooley was Baldwin's study in 1990, who found that unconscious reminders of approval and disapproval from significant others influence our self-evaluations. In this study, Catholic participants read a description of a sexual dream and then subliminally presented them with a scowling face of either the Pope or an unfamiliar other, also with a disapproving expression, and finally had them rate themselves on dimensions such as morality, intelligence, and talent. Catholics viewed themselves as less worthy after being exposed to the disapproving face of a significant authority figure, but not a stranger. So participants read a description of some kind of sexual dream, and then in like 0.1 seconds, an image of the Pope pops up, either thumbs down from the Pope or some just random person from the street giving you a thumbs down. And they wanted to, so the researchers are trying to see if kind of this disapproval from someone that you value, theoretically Catholics valuing the Pope, giving you a thumbs down, will it impact how a person evaluates their morality, intelligence, and talent? And as stated, the results found that Catholics view themselves less worthy when exposed to the Pope giving them the thumbs down, but not the stranger. So kind of the idea here is there's an unconscious reminder of a disapproval, which can temporarily at least influence your self-evaluation. These kind of subliminal messaging things usually are typically have very either small effect sizes and are short-lasting. But kind of here, again, just kind of an example of support for this model. Mead also argued in 1934 that people internalize an image of a, quote, generalized other, a mental representation of how people, on average, appraise the self. People consider how this abstract collective I views them. So we're creating in our mind this average kind of set of viewpoints that exist in society, and that generalized other, that mental representation of people judging our behaviors. Again, kind of going back to what I stated before, that we can also internalize or socialize, not just like whatever parents or whatever, but the greater culture, the greater whatever political values, economic values, social values, and we kind of generalize those in our head into like this amorphous being who are then looking down on us, judging us, and influencing how we should behave, and consequently evaluating if we're doing something good or bad or something like that. And this is related to stigma because there are different stigmas that exist in society, and if you are kind of violating that stigma or kind of active in it, you are more likely to feel unhappy. So for research, for example, suggests that people who are obese in societies that they perceive as kind of having higher stigma against kind of against obese people, they are more likely, those obese participants are more likely to rate themselves as feeling unhappy. So again, kind of this generalized other of like norms, judging you and evaluating how you are, appraising the self at all times, or at least in times when that stigma is activated within kind of your working self-concept. Errors in reflected appraisals. Our self-concept doesn't always match up with how other people view us. So the question is, which is more accurate? Internal versus external characteristics? External characteristics that are easily observed by others, such as being boisterous or charming, others may have more accurate views of us than we do ourselves, according to a 2010 study. However, internal characteristics that are not so readily observable, such as being anxious or optimistic, we are often more accurate than others at judging ourselves. So kind of things that are easily observed are more likely to, or I should say others are more likely to have a more accurate view of ourselves, some research support, versus kind of those internal characteristics where we are more likely to have an accurate judgment of ourselves, appraisal of ourselves, according to a 2011 study. So you can think this through of like, for you have anxiety internally based, and people around you are like, oh, you crushed that test, you crushed that speech, you crushed whatever that game, and meanwhile in your head you're like, dude, I was having a freaking meltdown. And because people can't see that, they can only see what it is. You can, see anxiety, but, broadly speaking here for the purposes of the example, they can only see like, oh, that you did a very good job at your speech or whatever. You did very good on a test or something along those lines. Next, we have reflected appraisals. What we think about people, what we think other people think of us, as compared with actual appraisals, can differ. The average correlation between self-ratings of attractiveness and ratings by romantic partners and friends was found to be only about 0.24 in a 1988 study. So what this is getting at here is there could be differences in what we think other people think about us. So I think that you think that I'm stupid or something along those lines versus actually you don't think I'm that stupid, theoretically. So that kind of difference. So you trying to think, you thinking about what other people think of you compared to what they actually think. And this research suggests, this little 1988 study, this was a little fun study of self-ratings of attractiveness and ratings by your romantic partners and friends being correlated, but again, that is small effect size. For our non-stat heads out there, correlations range from 0 to 1. This is 0.2, so a low correlation. So significantly correlated, but a weak effect size, demonstrating that there are differences in self-ratings of attractiveness and ratings by your romantic partner, who theoretically are going to say you're hotter than you are, or maybe they hate, maybe you're having some relationship issues and they think you're ugly at that time. So what are some potential reasons for these differences between what we think other people think of us and what they actually think? Some of this can be gaps, maybe due to distortion in feedback from others. So, for example, people can temper feedback. So you ask your friend, "Oh, how do you look today? How do you look today? How's that new lipstick treating you, or whatever? How'd you do?" And you're like, "Oh, you did good. You're good." Kind of situation here, because you don't want to hurt your friend's feelings. And thus, your view of how what you think other people think about you is incorrect because your friend is trying to be nice to you. Also, our best guesses often center on perceived faults. Quote, I talk too much again, and I always make that stupid joke. But the other person does not have access to that information and doesn't know about the insecurities we've been dealing with. As a result, we underestimate how much our new conversation partners like us and enjoy our company, for example, according to a 2018 study. So kind of the point of this is people have no idea what's going on in your mind in general. So you could be having this like, "Oh man, every time I go to a party, I remember 3 years ago I said this and then I acted like this, and this is so consistent with how I always act." Nobody knows any of that shit. Nobody knows what's going on in your mind palace. All they know is what's happening right there. So you're basically contributing to an error in reflective appraisal by kind of taking your mind palace insecurities and kind of assuming or that other people are, either have that information or being influenced by that information, when in reality, they don't have access to the information and they have no idea what the hell is going on and what your insecurities are in your head. Thus contributing to errors in reflective appraisal, thinking that other people hate you or something after a party when they have no idea why they would possibly hate you based on something you did 8 years ago or something like that. We often falsely assume that other people will make sweeping judgments of us based on one or two actions. So, for example, you might think people at the party will negatively judge your cooking skills in general, viewing you as somebody who is incapable of making anything worthy of a human consumption. Say, for example, if you mess up cookies. Instead, however, research suggests that people will probably just judge you only on your cooking making abilities. So here you go, you have like something bad happens or you make some kind of error, and instead of evaluating the appraisals of others as, okay, maybe that person sucks at making cookies or whatever, this particular form of cookies, something very specific, you're like, oh my God, they think I'm the worst person, I'm trying to poison their food, or I'm the worst chef of all time. So kind of taking, believing that sweeping judgments about yourself is made from kind of one or two specific actions, which in general, depending on, of course, the error, that is not what people do on average. Next, we have social comparison theory. People come to know themselves partly by comparing themselves with similar others, according to Festinger in 1954. They provide the most informative indication of their traits, skills, and abilities. So stopping here, social comparison, you just break down the word here, you're comparing yourself to other people for social purposes, and according to this theory, people who are similar to yourselves. Because if they're similar to yourself, you're going to believe they have similar traits and skills and abilities as you, thus you can learn about other people to learn about yourself. So research suggests people are more likely to compare themselves with individuals in their local environments than with large groups, national averages, or other entities that lie outside their familiar day-to-day experience, according to this 2010 study. So rather than big national averages, this research suggests that people compare themselves to people they interact on an everyday basis and use those comparisons, not some greater statistical national average or something along those lines, to delineate information about their trade skills and abilities. We have two forms of comparisons that we're going to talk about. Downward comparison, that is comparing oneself with those who are worse off, and upward comparison, comparing oneself with those who are better off. So there are multiple examples of this, but a kind of classic downward comparison, by classic I mean one that I say all the time. You can watch a reality TV show and you can be like, ugh, those people are idiots. I would never do that. Damn, they're dumb. And then now all of a sudden you feel better about yourself. Versus upward comparison, you're looking up, you're looking to a model who's performing some kind of action. So you see some star athlete and you see yourself in them and they've won the championship. And you're like, wow, if that person who's just like me can do it, I can do it. So now I feel better about myself of what I'm capable of achieving. So you're aiming up, basically. You're comparing yourself to someone who's above you at that moment or something like that, has some kind of social prestige. Versus downward, again, comparing yourself to someone who's worse off. So a 2016 study found that when college students enrolled in an online course were asked to peer review excellent essays written by their classmates, they were more likely to quit the course than those who asked to look over lower quality essays. A, quote, star peer is meant to motivate us, but it can backfire when it contributes to us perceiving success and failure as being out of reach. So this idea here is for upward social comparison. In this study here, you have college students peer review essays and say they're like elite essays, like they're superstar essays, they're amazing. And theoretically, you're like, okay, that's going to motivate you to be a star. But if they are so good and you just see it as like way out of your reach, you're like, whoa, I cannot replicate this. There is no way in hell I'm getting in this class. I'm leaving this class. So in this case, the social comparison is too high and it makes you feel bad about yourself or influence your behavior by removing yourself from the course. There's also evidence that showing women in the United States, kind of just ultra thin models, can increase anxiety, with the idea being like, oh my God, if that's the beauty standard, there's no way I can hit it. Therefore, I feel bad about myself. I have increased levels of anxiety, kind of, which also kind of coincides with kind of gender roles, gender expectations through time. There are also errors in social comparison. For example, overestimating your own attributes or underestimating the attributes of those to whom you compare yourself to. So you're watching LeBron James play and you're like, oh, of course, I can be just like LeBron James. So you're overestimating your own abilities. Or you can watch LeBron James play and be like, oh, this dude sucks. So you're underestimating the attributes of that person. So you're like, oh, of course I can do that. So kind of our ability to estimate our own attributes and other attributes, there can be errors. One common example of this is the better than average effect. On many abilities and traits, most people think they are better than average, which is statistically impossible. So especially in the United States, you ask a person, where do you fall on this trait? And the majority of people will say they're better than average, which again is statistically impossible. That is literally the definition of average. Everybody cannot be above average. Now, there are cultural effects related to the better than average effects. So for example, a 2012 study by Lee found that South Koreans did not demonstrate better than average effects for some traits. And the effect varies by traits and abilities and allocentric goals, that is concerned with the interests of others rather than themselves goals. So some research suggests that this better than average effect is far less common in some collectivist cultures, for example, in South Korea. So it's this kind of individualistic, unique cultures and economic, political, social structures within a country can kind of influence these things, thinking, oh, you're unique, you're the best, and everybody's better than average. Also, the kind of the better than average effects vary by traits and abilities, so more likely for some traits or abilities. And for allocentric goals, basically you can think of this as in-group goals or a quote unquote collective self, an interdependent self. There's different theoretical models for this. And basically the kind of goals that a person pursuing that can impact the better than average effect. So if you're performing a goal in service to a greater group or something like that versus kind of a private goal, these things can affect each other. You don't really need to get into the details there, but just to demonstrate that the better average effect, like everything in psychology, has kind of variations and depending on the specific developmental context in which the effect or the construct is taking place in. Correcting errors of comparison. Ignorance of ignorance affects performance ratings. Dunning argued in 2003 that skills needed to produce correct responses are virtually identical to those needed to evaluate the accuracy of one's responses. So the idea being, you don't know what you don't know, and the skills that are required to be good at something are also associated with your ability to evaluate if you're good. So basically, the classic Dunning effect situation here, that people ignorant in a particular skill or set of knowledge, whatever it is, field, they're more likely to think that they're better at it because they don't have the ability to evaluate themselves within that field because they're so ignorant of that field. So they end up overrating their ability. It's kind of the theoretical model here. In one study in 2015, people who claim to be experts in areas such as personal finance or biology claim to know about concepts that, unknown to them, were completely made up. So unaware of what they didn't know, that they imagined knowing what cannot be known. So in this case here, someone's like, oh yeah, I'm good at biology, but they actually don't know shit. In this case here, researchers are like, okay, you've ever heard of this, blah, 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 construct, and it's just completely made up. And the people who said that they are experts in biology are like, oh yeah, I definitely know that. And of course, again, it is made up. So basically, that sub-bullet point in English being that the participants were so unaware of what they didn't know, and thus unable to evaluate the accuracy of their responses, that they're imagining knowing things that don't even actually exist. So as people learn to become more aware of their own ignorance, however, they tend to become more accurate about themselves. So kind of an increased understanding of what your knowledge actually is improves kind of accuracy about yourselves and in your related skills or fields of knowledge. Next, we go on to the self-perception theory. People form impressions of themselves by observing their own behaviors in the situation in which it occurs. So you're perceiving yourself. Again, breaking down the theory here. So the basic idea is that we often like a strong internal feeling about who we are or how we feel. So we look to our own behavior to make inferences about what we are like. So basically, often people don't know what the hell they're feeling, why they're doing what they're doing, who they are. So what we do, we're like, okay, oh, I just did this. Therefore, I guess this is who I am, is kind of the idea here. So for example, you're crawling through a tight cave for the first time in your life, and you start to have a meltdown. You think to yourself, oh shit, this means I must be claustrophobic. That is, it is who you are in your traits. You discover this by observing your own behavior. Next, with the facial feedback hypothesis. This is the idea that changes in facial behaviors elicit emotions associated with those expressions. Inferences are flexible because the meaning of a given muscle movement changes depending on the context in which it occurs. Same movements can take on several contextually sensitive meanings, and our minds flexibly integrate those meanings when forming judgments. However, this has been failed. Many of these results have been failed to replicate, which was argued in a 2019 study. So again, the idea here is that facial expressions elicit emotions associated with those expressions. So for example, if you can make a participant smile and they're not unaware that they're being forced to smile, and then they watch like a cartoon, they're more likely to rate the cartoon as funnier. And kind of the idea here is that you're inferring, oh shit, I'm smiling, therefore I must be happy, and therefore, wait, this show must be really good. So kind of using that information, looking at your own behavior, your own self to kind of infer something about yourself or what it is that you're interacting with. And here I will pause to make a couple points. One, body language experts, not real. Please see my other courses. You took me in general psychology and my other courses, not a thing, because again, there are cultural ways of expressing emotions, different contexts, change the meaning of kind of emotion or your expression, your quote unquote body language and stuff like that. That is, there's no kind of universal definition of body language. The context, your culture, whatever, all these other things, your mood of the day, whatever, can influence what your body expression is. So thus not reliable, and many reasons why they're not allowed to be used in courts, because it's kind of not reliable. It's not scientifically sound. Research has demonstrated. And here from the facial feedback hypothesis, many of these research studies have failed to replicate, which is kind of a classic problem in psychology and other fields as well. This could be related to a whole host of reasons, and some of which can include that the facial feedback hypothesis may be relevant at sometimes in particular circumstances, but not a kind of universal phenomenon. So, for example, some research suggests that when people are being told that they're being watched, they're less likely to be affected by facial feedback, maybe because they're relying on other people, versus when they are told that they're not being filmed or being watched, maybe they rely on their own facial feedback information more. But again, like many of these things in psychology, these constructs are debated, and the reliability of the findings can be a little bit iffy through times, and this is a discussion for a different class. So check out my research methods course for more nerdy breakdowns of this, or my developmental psychology courses. There are also errors in self-perception. The idea of self-perception is that we often lack insight into who we are or how we feel, and we look to our own behavior to make inferences about what we are like. However, our inferences can be incorrect when we misjudge how situations affect us. We can have an overestimating or underestimating effect. So we may overestimate the impact of some situational factors, some environmental factors, and underestimate the effect of others. The point being that we all use inference, but it is not a perfect process. People in general are not great at understanding sources of their mood fluctuation in general, some research suggests. But for a more obvious thing, like whatever, some close relative or friend dies and you're feeling bad, okay, well, that's kind of direct. Those people, in those occasions, people are better at it. However, in general, through life, things can be a lot more ambiguous, and that's when people have a difficult time correctly estimating the effects of given environmental factors on their selves. And this matters for self-behavior because you're trying to figure out why is it that you're behaving a certain way, and thus kind of correctly estimating the effect of different situational factors matters, because that will theoretically impact how you define yourself. Self-regulation. This is defined as a set of processes for guiding one's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to reach desired goals. The ability to self-regulate is based on three key capacities of the human mind that emerged with the evolution of the human cortex. These include self-awareness, that is the ability to assess thoughts, feelings, and behavior in relation to the world around us. Goal setting, which can be quite large, like, I'm going to discover the cure for dementia, or just work out more. And mental time travel, reach back to the past and envision the distant future. These sets of capacities allow and provide for a greater flexibility in choice of behaviors. So we regulate in the pursuit of some kind of a desired goal. So thus our feelings, our thoughts, our behaviors will theoretically be in service to and in pursuit of those goals. And then we have three capacities that contribute to this process of self-regulation. That is behaviors, again, used to reach a particular goal. They include self-awareness, goal setting, and mental time travel. So we can time travel, imagine a future wherein we've met our goal and everything's all happy. And then self-awareness, where we have the ability to assess our feelings and behavior, and thus assess whether we are on the correct path towards our goal, theoretically. And this ability to goal set, time travel, and awareness allows us to imagine hypothetical situations, allowing for flexibility and increased behavioral choice in pursuit of our goals. Now let's break down three of these components, beginning with the role of self-awareness. Awareness of the self increases self-regulation. Your attention is focused either inward on some aspect of yourself, that is, things you need to get done today, your social life, or focus outward on some aspect of the environment, some cat, for example, or the internet. So when you're focusing on yourself, that is, you're directing this inward, you're focused on your values, your goals, and attitudes that directly connect to the situation that you're in. So whatever, you have to run some errands, you got to go to the post office or something like that. And now you're focused on the goal of whatever, trying to sell something on eBay or something along those lines. Or you're taking a test and you're trying to focus, and you have your self-focus inward, and you're thinking, okay, my goal is to graduate this class and whatever, become whatever, a doctor or something along those lines. So I'm going to bring those goals to my mind as I'm taking this test. And if it's outward, whatever, a cat is walking around or something like that, now you have you're focusing yourself on that cat or whatever, some TikTok you're watching or something along those lines. Next, we have the self-awareness theory, developed in 1972. This argues that aspects of the self, one's attitudes, values, and goals, will be most likely to influence behavior when attention is focused on the self. Self-awareness highlights the gap between what one is doing and what one should/could be doing. In Freudian speak, that is the superego. Strategies for coping with negative discrepancy include distractions from self, focus, and commitment to do better. So when we're focused on ourselves, we are likely to bring up attitudes, values, and goals that are going to influence our behavior, as already stated with the testing example. Now, one key aspect of self-awareness is that we can judge who we want to be with what it is we actually are. So, for example, you bomb this quiz based on this lecture right here, and you have multiple ways you can do this, or I can handle this. One, you bombed it, so it's like, oh, I really don't want to bomb this. This is not who I want to be. This is not in pursuit of my goals to graduate. And it's not just theoretically your goal, but whatever society goals that you graduate, or your parents, your guardians, your communities, whatever it is, those goals are now in what you should be doing, what you could be doing, passing tests, and what you actually did, bomb the tests, are now in conflict. You can cope with this by distracting yourself. So whatever, I'm going out tonight. We're getting crossfaded. We're going ham at the club. Or you can say, hey, you know what? Next time I'm going to study, or I'm going to pay more attention. I'm going to get off TikTok while I'm listening to this lecture. And you're more likely to commit to the latter, commitment to do better, when you actually believe that it is achievable. You could theoretically study more, and it's possible you can do this. But if you think this is completely impossible, your goal is impossible, you can either give up the goal, aka withdraw from the class, or just keep partying and keep distracting yourself throughout the entire semester. And here's a nice little schematic if you're interested in kind of the difference when your attention is focused, when your when your behaviors do not match up with your goals, what you could do doesn't match up what you did do, and then how you go to reduce that discrepancy through escapism or adjusting your future behavior through whatever studying or something along those lines. Internal standards. Internalized attitudes, values, and goals guide behavior only to the extent that people are self-aware. So stopping there, the idea is you have to be aware that you're in violation of the standards to theoretically engage in escapism or change your behavior. So attitudes and behaviors do not always line up. For example, in a 1979 study by Beeman, they found that a mirror can make Halloween trick-or-treaters more likely to follow instructions of taking only one treat from an unattended candy bowl. Self-awareness helps to bring behavior in line with cultural morals and values. So kind of the idea here is that you have the Halloween candy bowl out, and you have a little sign that says, only take one piece of candy, and then whatever, trick-or-treaters they're being deviants. They're doing the crime, they're taking all the candy. And what these researchers found, that if you put a mirror up, the children were more likely to only take one piece of candy. Why might that be? Well, now you're looking at yourself in the mirror, violating the rules. And now you have conscious awareness of your behavior, violating your internalized values of society, of whatever, lying, cheating, stealing, whatever it is. And now you're more likely to resolve that this discrepancy of what you should do and what you could do, or I should say what you could do and what you are actually doing. That is, you should only be taking one piece of candy. You're actually taking 20 pieces of candies. Now you can now that discrepancy you've become more aware of it by seeing yourself in the mirror, and now your behavior can shift and reflect the societal standards, aka only taking one piece of candy. This is one reason why that stores will put like a zillion cameras around, besides obvious things. But kind of the idea here is you see yourself doing a crime, then you're like, oh no, wait, I'm not a criminal. I shouldn't do that. I'm not going to steal anymore from Walmart or something like that. Escaping self-awareness? So what happens when we perceive ourselves as falling short of our standards, but we feel incapable of changing our behaviors? In these situations, we often try to escape self-awareness. Self-awareness research has revealed several ways that people try to escape from self-awareness when they feel incapable of changing, such as binge watching TV, causing themselves physical pain. This can also contribute to binge watching and drug and alcohol abuse. Could be because these activities tend to reduce self-focus, and therefore any unpleasant thoughts that the self is falling short of its standards. So we feel like that we are unable to do what we are supposed to be doing, either our own personal goals and or like society's moral standards, something along those lines. We cannot resolve it. We can't do it. We feel bad about it. So what are we going to do? We're going to use escapism. So we can just drown ourselves in TV. We can engage in self-harm, so kind of literally like distracting ourselves from ourselves, or distracting ourselves from ourselves by now we can just focus on the physical pain. I'm now less self-aware, not just looping in my head of how I'm a failure. Now instead I'm like, oh, I just hurt myself, and now I can focus on that. Or you get drunk or you abuse drugs, and now you're kind of less aware of yourself. In general, you can go the other way. So now you're kind of distracted, and you're reducing those kind of unpleasant feelings that you've let yourself down. You've let down whatever your family, community, your country, whatever the hell it is. So in some ways, kind of a pain, internalized emotional pain kind of release, a distractor. So the tendency to escape self-awareness in times of failure may be especially true of people with generally high levels of self-awareness. Hope, or the belief that one can accomplish something in the future, buffers, that is, decreases the effect of levels of self-awareness, or that is the most negative aspects of kind of just like perpetual self-awareness. People with higher temporarily increased feelings of hope view obstacles as challenging opportunities for growth rather than reasons for giving up on life, a 2015 study found. So if there's a way out, there's a hope that you can adjust your behavior to meet the standards that you want, that you can overcome, alcohol often happens. This can, when you're super self-aware, you're capable of changing, you're abusing alcohol or some kind of drugs, you get addicted, kind of the hope. So then hope can kind of decrease the likelihood that you are continue to abuse drugs, because now you literally can imagine a different future, a different self, a different whatever society or whatever, wherein you are, depending on your theoretical perspective, connected with other people, you have meaning in your life, you can meet those standards, you're not a failure, whatever it is. But ultimately that's serving as a buffering effect that is decreasing the probability of the negative effects of increased levels of self-awareness and unable to change to meet your goals or live up to sets of internalized standards of yourself and society. So what feelings does self-awareness arouse? If the shortcoming is given a behavioral attribution, people feel guilty. If given a dispositional attribution, people conclude they are bad people. So that is, if you did a action that you think is bad, so a behavior, specific only a behavior, you feel guilty about that behavior. However, if you're given a dispositional attribution, that is, aka like that's who you are, you did that thing because that's who you are, then people are more likely to conclude that they are bad people. Which brings us to the self-discrepancy theory. This theory argues that people feel anxiety when they fall short of how they ought to be, but feel sad when they fall short of how they ideally want to be. So it's how you ought to be is whatever society or whatever you've been taught to internalize. You feel anxiety because you're falling short of what you're supposed to be. Whoever it is that taught you, or whatever it is you, or whatever the source of that is, but you're supposed to be something, you're not being that. So you feel anxiety versus who you want to be. These are maybe your goals, what you would like to accomplish, which can differ from who you ought to be. These actually can conflict at times. So when you're falling short of who you want to be, the argument is you feel sad. Which brings us to these two selves, the ought self and the ideal self. The ought self, these are conscious, how you should be. You can think of this as your have to goals. These are goals you have to do. The theoretical argument of the ought self is, we as children anticipate that our guardians might become angry and punish us, or withdraw love and protection, and we feel anxious/guilt as a result. For example, stealing cookies before dinner. So here a child has stolen cookies before dinner, they're eating the dessert before dinner, and consequently, the child will feel anxious because they're going to get punished, and that punishment include withdrawal of love, protection, or whatever, some kind of corporal punishment. But ultimately, we're not acting how you should be acting, how we have to act. Thus, anxiety and thus guilt because we violated how we should be, and we're expecting some kind of punishment or something along those lines. And next we have the ideal self. That is how you want to be, what you would like to accomplish. These are your, quote, want to goals. The theoretical argument is we anticipate letting our guardians, or maybe more, greater society, who knows, down. They are disappointed, so we feel discouraged, sad, or dejected. So you are at a basketball practice and you have like a horrible game, and your parent or guardian, whoever, is like, oh, you did good or whatever, don't worry about it. But in your mind, you're like, oh, I know they're disappointed with me. And that difference in reaction, aka disappointment versus punishment, contributing to different feelings. So disappointment from our guardians, from society, whatever it is, we feel discouraged, sad, dejected, and then guilt for our odd self. We feel guilt and anxious because of some kind of punishment. Research suggests we all have both oughts and ideal selves. Some people are more focused on their oughts and others more on their ideals. They influence the types of emotions people generally experience when they fall short of their standards. And there's a whole lot of different theoretical arguments about this. But for the purpose of this class, this is good enough. Which brings us to self-discrepancy theory before we kind of break down goals related to the ideal and ought self in a little more detail. So self-discrepancy theory, this is how we feel about an action, depends on whether we compare it to our mental image of who we ought to be or the person we ideally want to be. So again, ideal versus ought. Otto Rank proposed that feelings of guilt arise from bad behavior and signal to us that an important social relationship is in trouble. Guilt motivates us to take action to repair the damage we have done. Research which supports this argument shows that people who are likely to experience guilt about their self-discrepancies also feel more empathy and are more motivated to make up for their past mistakes by apologizing to those who are harmed and offering to make the situation better somehow, according to research from 1991 and 1996. Point being, the guilt serves a use. There's a use for there's a function towards guilt, and guilt kind of signaling that our social relationship that matters to us is in trouble. And again, we are social beings; these social relationships matters. Thus, guilt can serve to motivate us to attempt to resolve whatever it is that's the source of our guilt and repair that social relationship. So thus, people who experience guilt report relatively higher levels of guilt are more likely to apologize and harm for the harm that they've caused and offering to make the situation better. Now, granted, you can feel way too guilty as well, and there are downsides to this, but this is kind of just one aspect of guilt. We are aware of ourselves, then you're aware of how it's affecting other people. Therefore, theoretically, this is correlated with empathy, and therefore, you care about the social relationships, you're going to try and repair that harm. Rank also argued that people feel ashamed of themselves when they conclude that they are bad people. People who experience shame show higher levels of depression and are more likely to turn to drugs and alcohol as a means of escaping painful feelings of self-awareness, according to a 2005 study. So kind of the interpretation here is that when people feel they're bad people, so they're performing a bad behavior, not because they just made a mistake, they're performing bad behavior, but because they are a bad person. So bad behavior reflects them being a bad person. You have higher levels of shame. Thus you have kind of a higher level of negative self-evaluation. You're more likely to give up. You feel worthless. You feel powerless. You have little hope. In those cases, you have higher rates and thus consequently are correlated with higher rates of depression and using or abusing drugs and alcohol to, again, escape that feeling of self-awareness and kind of distract yourself from your own shortcomings. That kind of loss of connection, that you've let down people, you've let down yourself. You've now have purposelessness, so you can. There are multiple ways to escape this, and some of which include drug abuse, which in and of itself is associated with depression. So you're kind of getting a kind of accelerated effects where these kind of things are feeding off each other in kind of a negative or a positive feedback loop. Research into the self-discrepancy theory suggests that people are more likely to persevere and succeed when they frame their goals in terms of living up to their ideal selves. That is, their want-to goals, their autonomous motives. The person freely chooses them to seek enjoyment or personal benefits or express their true self. People have been found to be less successful attaining goals framed in terms of their ought self. also called the have-to goals because they're driven by feelings of guilt and social pressure. So kind of the idea, and there's multiple interpretations of this, is that the motivation for an odd self, those have-to goals, are really, again, kind of being stimulated through kind of this fear of punishment and doing things that you, quote, have to do, not necessarily things that you want to do or are consistent with your, quote unquote, like true self, things that you intrinsically are motivated to pursue. Versus kind of want-to goals related to your ideal self, aka something that's your true self, your intrinsic interest, something that brings you fulfillment. You're more likely to pursue and succeed with those goals. Of course, there are also environmental factors. So if your environment, wherever it is you live, are not allowing you to be your ideal self, there are, depending on your school of thought, psychological consequences for that as well. How goals motivate and guide actions. Goals can be activated either consciously by bringing them to mind or unconsciously cued by the environment. Goals send urgent messages to act. Whereas simple bits of knowledge, like the fact that a typical golf ball has 336 dimples, tend to fade from memory at a constant rate. Goals continue to demand attention at a constant and in some cases increasing rate until the state is attained. So kind of the idea here is goals give you messages to act and they demand attention. You need constant attention, or at least some level of constant attention to think through consciously to say, okay, this behavior is in pursuit of my goals. However, even subtle exposure to goal-related stimuli can automatically activate the goal and guide behavior. This is called the automotive theory from a 2002 study. For example, you walk in a toy aisle and you see a basketball. Doing so increases the probability that you will practice shooting. So seeing that basketball serving as a cue would remind you, oh shit, I should be practicing basketball because that is one of my goals. Goals are also influenced by other people. From early childhood, people internalize the standards and values of their parents, their broader culture, and throughout adulthood. These social influences act like internal voices judging one's behaviors. So say you really want to be a doctor for your uncle. Well, when you are around your uncle, you're more likely to remember that you're supposed to be studying to be a doctor or something along those lines. So people reminding us of our goals because goals are influenced by other people. And through time, we internalize those voices judging our behaviors, not just from parents or guardians, but our community and our broader culture, the world around us. So you can go by a bank or something. You're driving by a bank, you're like, oh wait, that cue reminds me that I'm supposed to be grinding for money. That's like that's the broader cultural standards of work or something along those lines that we internalize through time. And that that institution reminds us of those societal standards and values that we internalize and kind of have to deal with, whether you agree with it or not. Of course, whether you agree with it or not is going to influence how you behave consequently and how you feel. Because those often reflect kind of those ought-to, the ought-to self or the ought-to goals, the have-to goals. Goals can be concrete or abstract. So the same action can take on different meaning depending on how it connects to a goal. Concrete conceptions, e.g. how, specify how the action is accomplished, such as laying a brick. And abstract conceptions, why, specify why the action is being performed, such as building a skyscraper. So for example, if you ask what you're doing to a bricklayer, they can take a more abstract answer or a more concrete answer. So what are you doing? I'm building a skyscraper, or I'm building a wall. So you can ask multiple bricklayer employees who are, or workers who are doing the same action, and they can give you different reasons for why they're performing that action. Again, ranging from more abstract concepts, why interpretation, or concrete conceptions. So how? So I'm laying a brick, something along those lines, versus I'm building a skyscraper. I'm building a place where people can come together as one. This brings us to the action identification theory. So people have a mental, quote, hierarchy of interpretations arranged like a ladder. One can mentally move up the ladder to form broader, more comprehensive conceptions of an action, or down to form concrete conceptions of how the same action is accomplished. When our goal-directed actions bog down, we shift attention toward lower levels of abstractions, defining our actions in concrete terms. So in this study in 1983, they had participants eat Cheetos. One group ate Cheetos with their hands, another ate Cheetos with the chopsticks. The participants were then asked, what it is you're doing. Participants who were using their hands were more likely to use abstract conceptions. That is, I am reducing hunger. I'm eating to reduce hunger, aka a Y conception, more abstract. Versus the participants who were using chopsticks to eat the Cheetos were more likely to use how descriptions, that is, concrete conceptions. So they're saying, oh, I'm using the Cheetos to move this to my mouth or whatever, something along those lines. So when our goal is challenging, we're bogged down, we're more likely to define our goals in concrete terms. When the action is going a little more smoothly, where we can think more abstractly. You're satisfying hunger, you're building a skyscraper, you're doing something very large, very abstract that isn't necessarily concretely what it is you're exactly doing right now, aka laying a brick or eating a chopstick or eating a Cheeto with a chopstick. The psychology of time, the control level theory. People focus more on concrete details when thinking about the near future and focus more on abstract meaning when thinking about the distant future. In the short term, people are more concerned in general with more pragmatic concerns, while in the long term, people in general are more concerned about abstract concerns. This possibly could be related to just having more information. So, for example, I ask you, what are you doing on Saturday night? You probably have greater idea than what if I asked you, what are you doing on Saturday night 7 years from now? And you may have some kind of abstract idea, or maybe watching some TV or going out or having fun, being with my significant others. So more abstract versus concrete. Short term, what are you doing Saturday? Well, I'm hanging out with XYZ specifically, or I'm staying home, or I'm gaming, whatever it is I'm doing. So how we think and the details of how we think differ depending on the time frame that we're working with. Affective forecasting, predicting one's emotional reactions to potential future events. However, these predictions are often inaccurate. For example, when people predict how they feel after suffering a harsh insult or watching their favorite football team lose an important game, they anticipate that the painful sting of these unpleasant events will be greater than it is and will last longer than it does. So we can have trouble thinking through, and errors can occur. Predictions can be inaccurate because we overestimate the duration of the pain that we feel and kind of the strength of the pain that we feel. In this case here, watching our favorite sports team lose. Predictions often overestimate the importance or the impact of a salient factor. We don't think about the other factors that will likely influence our future emotions, such as relationships and health. We tend to underestimate how successful we are at coping with negative emotions that arise, and we overestimate how often we'll experience an emotion. So, for example, our sports team can lose, but also maybe we are thinking we're going to be feeling horrible a month from now because we don't think through like, oh, we have these other relationships in our lives that are good for us. I'm going to be really healthy, and all these other things that can happen that are going to impact our future emotions. And we also underestimate how good we are coping with negative emotions. And thus, if you think that you're underestimating, you can't cope with your sports team losing, you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm ever going to get over this. When in fact, you're probably just going to get over it and move on with your life eventually, and probably quicker than what you think. Interestingly, affective forecasting also affects our behaviors. Research suggests that when people do something once, like go to a museum or play a video game, they think they have seen, quote, it, and they underestimate the enjoyment they will get from repeating the experience in the future. So again, affective forecasting, trying to predict what your emotional reaction will be to a future event. In this case here, we go to a museum and you're like, okay, I've already done it, whatever, who cares? But you've seen it. But there are some things you didn't see, or maybe you're there with a different person, or it's just different. Like walking the same trail can be different every single day. You're in a different mood, there are different animals, whatever. Different things are on your mind. As some of our great minds once said, you can't step in the same river twice, and we underestimate that. And thus forecast repeating the same behavior, playing the same video game, going to the same museum, the same park. We underestimate that the joy of doing it again, thus inaccurately forecasting how we will feel in the future during a particular event. What are some challenges to self-regulation? One of the keys to effective self-regulation is the capacity for willpower. That is impulse control. Willpower is the capacity to overcome the many temptations, challenges, and obstacles that could impede pursuit of one's long-term goals. There are other constructs that are very similar. Grit, for example, and there's not a clean definition of these constructs. So for the purpose of our class, willpower, we're going with. There are hot processes and cold processes related to self-regulatory behaviors. Hot processes are driven by, quote, strong emotions. They provide the direction and energy to seek out goals. Focusing on our emotions orients us to seek out pleasurable outcomes and avoid unpleasant outcomes. This is described as impulsive by some scholars. Cold processes rely on reasoning, activated through mindful intention, activated by tricking ourselves into thinking we don't value a temptation. So hot processes, kind of broadly stated, dealing with kind of emotionally salient information, pleasures, or unpleasant outcomes. And cold processes, a little more abstract. You can think of like a number task or something like that, just kind of memorizing sets of digits. So kind of less emotionally salient, and theoretically more relying on reasoning. Again, these things merge together. As someone who did a lot of their doctoral research on this, but for the purpose of our class, we're being broad and we're separating these a little bit. We have delay of gratification task research. Research suggests performance on a delay of gratification task at age 4 predicts a variety of indicators of self-regulatory success up to 30 years later. In adulthood, compared to those who prefer to live in the moment, those high in the trait consideration of future consequences are more likely to eat healthy, recycle, put money into savings, and limit the risk of contracting sexually transmitted infections, according to a 2016 study. So kind of the idea here is that you can delay gratification. You can wait and not just kind of need that immediate hit, that immediate high. You can eat healthy and a desire to live longer, or you can decrease the amount of times that you eat unhealthy. You can save money or something along those lines. You're worried about the future. You're considering the future. You're delaying gratification. Carlson and colleagues in 2018 examined the ability to delay gratification among children born in the 1960s, the 1980s, and the 2000s using Michel's original task, that is the marshmallow task. Carlson found that children have generally improved their self-control abilities through decades. As a random side note, I personally know Carlson, and I hosted her, and I have her phone number, so watch out. I'm a big shot. Almost thought about doing a postdoc there. Didn't do it, though. Anyway, so she found that that there's a cohort effect of delayed gratification, aka later cohorts increasing their ability to delay gratification. And then the reason is why, and there's probably multiple reasons for this. And one interpretation is preschool. Preschool helps teach young children to delay gratification. You're working with others, you're doing little group play. Even though it doesn't look like they're doing much, they are learning kind of social dynamics. They're learning these kind of base level things that are required to perform well at school. So self-regulation, when you get into real elementary school, you got to be able to sit in a desk, be quiet, listen, whatever it is. You practice those skills and develop those skills in pre-K, and rates of pre-K admission have increased as compared to 1960s, for example. Thus, an example of how your environment can impact these developmental outcomes and behavior, self-regulation, and basically your historical period and government policies, such as Head Start, for example, impacts these quote-unquote individual behavioral outcomes. Ironic process theory. Ironic processing, according to Wegner in 1994, he argued that the more we try to think about something, the more those thoughts enter our mind and distracts us from other things. Students who spent 5 minutes trying to suppress thoughts of white bears reported having more than twice as many thoughts of white bears by the end of a 5-minute period, compared to students who didn't first try to push thoughts of white bears out of their mind. So basically, this study shows a photo of white bears. We tell one group of students not to think about white bears. We tell a second group of students nothing. Well, the group who were told to not think about white bears actually ended up having more thoughts about white bears as compared to the second group. And this is ironic processing. Isn't it ironic, don't you think? To break down why this may occur, we have to walk through some of the mental processes used to control thoughts. The first, the monitor, which is a mental process that is on the lookout for signs of unwanted thoughts. The operator, mental process that actively pushes any signs of the unwanted thoughts out of our consciousness through distraction, for example. And then we have this rebound effect. Unwanted thought becomes even more accessible than it was before suppression. So we're on the lookout for signs of unwanted thoughts. We're literally monitoring it. Then we have the operator. So that's the person doing the operation. They're trying, this mental process is trying to push away those unwanted thoughts out of our mind, typically through distraction. And then we have this rebound effect. So all of a sudden that unwanted thought, it's back. It's more accessible than ever. It's stronger than it was before you were trying to distract yourself, before you were trying to suppress this information. Thus, the ironic process theory. So why does this occur? Well, one explanation is that the monitor has to keep the unwanted thought close to consciousness in order to watch for it. When the operator stops actively providing alternative thoughts, the unwanted thought becomes more salient than there had been no effort to suppress it. Participants who were asked to not think about a particular person in their lives right before they went to bed were more likely to dream about the person than were participants who did not receive this request, into a 2004 study. So the monitor, aka this theoretical cognitive process, who's on the lookout for any signs of an unwanted thought, so the white polar bear, or you're not trying to think about like your ex or something. So it's constantly thinking like, okay, where is it? Where is a thought related to the polar bear? Where are any thoughts related to my ex? Okay, I'm watching it, I'm following it. At the same time, the operator is distracting you, is trying to distract you. So push away those unwanted thoughts. And by giving you alternative thoughts, you're thinking about, your favorite chicken sandwich. But eventually, the operator stops thinking about the chicken sandwich, and all that is left is the fact that your monitor has been thinking about your ex this entire time. Now your ex is super salient in your mind, and boom, rebound effect. Now you're thinking about your ex and you're dreaming about them. It's kind of is one theoretical explanation. A different explanation is the monitor and the operator place different demands on mental energy. This argument, or this kind of interpretation, argues that the monitor is an automatic process that can search for signs of an unwanted thought without demanding too much mental energy. It is fast and effortless. So basically, the monitor can work a lot. It's automatic, it requires very little energy, and it can last for a long time, versus the operator that is giving you alternative thoughts is much more effortful. It requires more mental energy. And thus, suppressed thoughts return when people are under a lot of cognitive load, whether that be from stress, distraction, or time pressure. So basically, you're stressed out, you have limited, lower amounts of cognitive resources available to think about something different. So then the operator kind of just gives up, whatever. You run out of energy, but what is left is that monitor that requires very little energy, aka, so now you're thinking about your ex or this polar bear or something like that. Because the operator has no more energy due to stress, distraction, or time, or whatever it is, and it's now no longer able to distract you as well. There are two basic ways to minimize ironic processing. One, minimize distraction, stress, and time urgency when regulating thoughts and behavior, and disengaging from effortful control when cognitive strain is present. So the first one here is kind of creating an environment wherein you have less stress, less time or urgency. So you're not waiting to that last second to get things done. Thus, stress is decreased, and now your operator can continue to perform its action if that theoretical model is correct. And then the paradoxical intervention is basically an argument that like, hey, stop trying to control your thoughts when there's strain, when you're under cognitive strain. So by trying to control your thoughts, you're kind of engaging in that ironic processing theoretical process, and that rebound effect is going to happen. So instead, when you have cognitive strain, stop trying to kind of control your thoughts. And this kind of has hit or miss research findings. But this insufficient energy argument is well debated. So in kind of support of this insufficient argument hypothesis, they argue that goal pursuit is an effortful process. This can contribute to, quote, ego-depletion. That is mental fatigue from extended use of self-control. And behavioral regulation is more difficult during this period of ego depletion. And during this ego depletion, risky behavior are more likely to occur. So you can think of it as like a muscle or whatever. After working out, it's sore, and now it's lacking strength until it kind of is not sore a day or two later or something like that. So in support of this interpretation, Garrison in 2019 asked students to control their writing behavior. Write a story about yourself, but do not include the letters A or N. When students were, these students who were asked to engage in this writing behavior made more mistakes on subsequent tests of attention control compared to students who did not first exercise self-control. This is just that even when tasks look different on the surface, they rely on the same bank of self-regulatory energy. So kind of the idea here is you have to write this challenging autobiography about yourself without the letters A or N. You have to kind of think about each letter, and that can kind of decrease cognitive resources available, which then can negatively impact future cognitive tasks. So after they did this autobiography without the A or N, students in this group committed more errors on tests of other intentional kind of cognitive tests than students who didn't have to take that A-N pre-autobiography test, which suggests that there's some kind of regulatory energy that can be expelled. And once you kind of have reached the limit of it, you hit this ego depletion, you cannot regulate your behavior or attention control or other cognitive or perform other cognitive tasks to the same degree you could without that initial kind of like exercise. However, there are a lot of critiques of this ego depletion argument. So, for example, there are contradictory findings. There's other research that does not support that finding. And some people argue that this actually is a motivational issue. Incentives such as a monetary reward for maintaining effort can dramatically reduce or even eliminate the ego depletion effect. This was found in 2006, 2003, 2009 studies. So reminding people as well of their personal values also can decrease or eliminate the ego depletion effect, and convincing people that engaging in further self-control will benefit either themselves or others. So kind of the argument here is that people just aren't motivated to continue to self-regulate because it is effortful. You can keep, but you can theoretically do it, I don't know, unlimited or a very long amount of time, and people just get tired of it eventually. They just don't care. They're not motivated. However, if you re-motivate them, then they're able to eliminate this ego depletion effect. So basically through monetary rewards or convincing them that their behavior is in line with their personal values or that they're doing this by continuing to self-control, it's going to positively impact themselves or other people they care about. Also, shifting to a task that is exciting or important can feel rejuvenating. So people just get bored. They get tired of taking the task, tired of doing the same thing over and over again. We're bored. We got to do something else. So self-control feels difficult, and that difficult feeling determines whether we're willing to further control ourselves or to let ourselves go. Researchers argue that self-control does not drain our energy in the same way that vigorous exercise does. So kind of the idea here is it's not a apt metaphor. The cognitive energy is not the same thing as a muscle being sore because whatever these values benefit from others, just pure boredom and monetary value rewards can impact our ability to keep regulating our behavior. Also, there are cultural beliefs about willpower. U.S. Americans on average believe that exerting self-control drains you, and they are more likely to show the ego depletion effect. But Indians, for example, believe that exerting willpower is energizing. And for them, self-control improves performance in a 2017 study. So this is a classic example of be careful of the research you read. It may be an accurate effect. Again, you got to replicate a study, but often research just samples white suburban Americans in general, U.S. Americans. And that effect may be present for them, but that does not mean it's universal. So in here, we have Indians having cultural belief that willpower is energizing, and kind of elongated self-control actually improves their performance. Again, the importance of culture and ultimately our social world impacting our behavior, and in this case, our cognitive processes. Getting our emotions under control. Some ways we can do this is through cognitive reappraisal. So reframe a situation to minimize one's emotional reaction to it. So you got dumped, you go to the restroom and use that time to think about why your ex sucked, and you are too busy for a relationship anyway. The breakup may actually seem like more of a blessing than a curse. So kind of the idea here is that something happens to you, you have an emotional response, and what you try to do here through cognitive reappraisal is you reappraise the way you think about this situation. So you got dumped and you're like, oh, this is the worst. I'm going to be single my whole life. I hate myself and I never will be loved. Well, you can reappraise this in multiple ways. One way is that you can be like, oh, my ex sucked anyway. Screw her. Or, I'm so busy anyway. I got so many things going on, dude. Like big night on TikTok ahead. It doesn't matter. I don't need this relationship. It's a blessing, not a curse. Is kind of the idea here. Next, you can also view the event from, quote, a future you. It reminds us that our current struggles are impermanent that this quote, this too shall pass, I should say, which loosens their grip on our emotions. However, this might feel good in the short run, but can lull you into not taking any action to improve your situation in the long run. So, kind of the idea of something bad happens to you, again, you get dumped or whatever, and what you can do is imagine yourself in 5-6 years. And you're like, you know what, 5-6 years? I don't care that my high school relationship broke up, whatever. I'm going to be out of college and I'll have this whole new world. And basically, this is telling you that your feelings, your emotional response is not permanent. This shall pass. Now, a bit of a downfall to future you is that people can think, okay, future me will handle this. Future me will figure this out. And right now, I'm just going to vibe. I'm not really going to do anything to change my behavior or kind of handle the negative emotions I'm feeling. Rather, again, future me. They'll improve it. And what can end up happening is they can lull you into not taking any action to improve your situation. And then you end up future you stuck in the same position as present you. And actually, I have a long running joke called future me. So feel free to spread it far, but give me credit. So anything I don't want to do, I'm like, you know what? Future me will handle this. Next, work to precisely identify which emotions are being felt. Differentiation between feelings of anger and sadness after getting dumped can enable you to more productively work through those feelings. So we talked about this before, but being able to differentiate how you feel, not just as general like bad, but anger, sadness, whatever specifically it is, you can then identify why you feel that way and work through those feelings. So you can think, I actually wanted that relationship because ultimately I want to be loved, but I can be loved in different ways from different people in future relationships, whatever. But ultimately, identifying the sources and the specific feelings you are can help you work through them productively. Let's talk about New Year's resolutions. So one, for example, I'm going to be a better friend from now on. So throughout the day, your attention is busy, and as you fall asleep that night, you think to yourself, hey, wait a second, I wasn't a better friend today. I never got the chance to. And this one reason for this is that your goal is stuck as a broad vision, and you haven't specified how you're actually going to implement your goals. Implementation intentions. Successful goals are more likely to happen if we can create mental rules that link specific situational cues to goal-directed behaviors. So mental rules that link particular situational cues to goal-directed behaviors are structured as, if situation X arises, then I will perform action Y. If I see Mark, I will ask him to go to get dinner to catch up, and now I can be a better friend. So rather than taking the time and energy to decide when to get started on a goal and what to do, the person automatically programs himself to respond to aspects of a situation automatically with goal-directed behaviors. So it's if-then. You don't really have to think it through. It's just all you need is that one structure. If-then. If this happens, then I'll do this. If it's Monday through Friday, then I'm going to eat vegetables, whatever it is. So now you don't have to think about it. You just have this automatic process, this equation of behaviors. We also have habit formations. Goals and intentions can contribute to habit formation by initially motivating us to repeat certain actions in particular contexts. Once a habit is formed, it can run automatically without requiring motivation or effort. Even when we're stressed, distracted, or otherwise unmotivated, a habit enables us to respond to situational cues with repeated behavior without having to draw up attentions or make conscious decisions. So in this case here, it just becomes a habit, a thing you do every single day that you really don't even have to think about. Next thing you know, every single day you're having a bowl of spinach. You're taking a little trail walk. You're going outside. You're touching grass. You're spending 3 hours less on TikTok because you're doing something else. This, again, is an automatic process that now you don't have to be motivated. You're just kind of used to it every single day. And next thing you know, this is part of my routine and I'm doing this every single day. So we are ultimately outsourcing our action initiation to our live environment. So this situation happens, I do this, or I'm just automatically kind of doing this as a habit through time, which requires, again, less effort, less motivation. Let's wrap it up with self-regulation and depression. People can fall into depression by persistent self-focus on an unattainable goal. The self-regulatory preservation theory of depression argues that a theorized reason for this escalating pattern of problems is that excessive inward focus on the self magnifies negative feelings, promotes attributing one's problems to oneself, and interferes with attention to the external world, leading to further failures. This is a spiral of misery, and self-recrimination culminates in a negative self-image. So when we focus on ourself, as stated earlier in the lecture, we are comparing ourself, or that is our current state with our ideal state, and those things do not necessarily are not necessarily consistent with each other. So in this case here, we have excessive inward focus. We're very much in our mind palace, and we're focusing on every single little thing we do. And then consequently, we become hyper focused on our negative feelings and attribute everything, all the issues of our life, our problems, to specifically ourselves. We're literally just in our own mind palace, and we are really not interacting or paying attention to the external world. So we're kind of purely like internal self situation. We're hyper focused on every single thing we think or do, and we're attributing all our kind of the world's problems to because of us. And in the process, we are isolating ourselves from interacting with the world around us, thus contributing to this cycle of self-recrimination and ultimately a negative self-image, a negative self-concept. And this often takes place also when kind of you're alone, so you're interacting basically with no one. You're just stuck in your own thoughts forever. Which brings us to the point that it's sometimes better to shift or abandon goals or shift from concrete to abstract goals. So why we're in a relationship, as we already talked about, to feel love. Are there other ways that you can feel love? Well, you can pursue alternative goals, maybe a new relationship, maybe a new hobby, maybe joining some organization, whatever it is. But ultimately, the optimal well-being requires a balance between self-focused pursuit of some goals and the relinquishment of goals beyond one's means. With that said, thank you so much for everyone for listening, and I hope you have a great week. Goodbye.